He was only 8 weeks old, a German shepherd puppy, coal-black with tan markings, barely the size of a football. And someone had already decided he didn't matter. They tied him to a tree on the edge of Robert Mitchell's property as the season's first snow began to fall. No food, no shelter, just a frayed yellow rope cutting into his tiny neck, holding him upright like a forgotten ornament in the gathering cold. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just waited. Because waiting was all he'd ever known. Snow accumulated. Darkness fell. No one came for him until a man who had already lost everything heard the silence that shouldn't have been there. Robert's weathered hands untied the rope, his breath clouding in the November air as he cradled the dying puppy against his chest. He couldn't save his son 20 years ago. But maybe, just maybe, he could save this one small life. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Claremont, Montana sat nestled between rolling plains and distant mountains, a place where everyone knew your business but pretended not to notice your pain. The Mitchell property stood 3 miles outside town, an aging farmhouse with white clapboard siding that Eleanor repainted each spring, a weathered red barn that leaned slightly southward, and 40 acres that Robert had stopped farming the year their son died. Robert Mitchell moved through life like a man preserving his energy for something important that never quite arrived. At 68, his 6-foot frame remained soldier straight, though years had softened what was once hard muscle. His hair, still thick but entirely silver, was kept military short, and his face, tanned and lined from decades outdoors, rarely revealed what stirred beneath. Since retiring from the Army's K-9 unit 15 years earlier, he'd spoken less each year, as if words were a resource being gradually depleted. Eleanor Mitchell carried herself with the gentle authority of her 30 years, teaching 3rd grade at Claremont Elementary. At 65, her auburn hair had faded to a soft copper threaded with silver, which she wore in a practical bob that framed kind eyes and a mouth that smiled more easily than it had in years. While Robert retreated inward after James's death, Eleanor had turned outward, joining committees and volunteering anything to escape the silence of their home. They had lost their only son, James, 20 years ago. A tragic accident at the wrong place, wrong time, the sheriff had called it. The boy's bedroom remained exactly as he'd left it, baseball trophies gathering dust, Montana State University acceptance letter still pinned to the corkboard. Eleanor dusted it weakly. Robert never entered. Their lives had settled into parallel routines that occasionally intersected at meals or while watching the evening news. The absence of their son hung between them like an invisible wall, seen around but never through, acknowledged but never discussed. Max, as they would later name him, was about to change everything. The German shepherd puppy, with ears too large for his head, would force open doors long closed, reveal secrets long buried, and ultimately offer the one thing the Mitchells had stopped believing in: a second chance at healing what had been broken for 20 years. The morning had begun like any other for Robert. He rose before dawn, a habit from decades of military service that retirement couldn't break. The November air held an unusual chill as he moved through the quiet house, starting coffee in the kitchen where Eleanor would find it when she woke. He glanced out the window and frowned at the dark clouds gathering over the distant mountains. Snow wasn't expected for at least 2 more weeks. Robert pulled on his worn leather work jacket and stepped onto the porch. The wind carried a sharp bite that made his old shoulder injury ache. He inhaled deeply, detecting the unmistakable scent of coming snow. After checking the thermometer 32 degrees and falling, he headed to the woodshed. If a storm was coming, they'd need extra firewood. The first flakes began to fall as he stacked split logs into the wheelbarrow. By the time he had filled it, the ground wore a thin white blanket. Robert was about to head back when he paused, his head tilting slightly. 20 years as a K-9 handler had attuned him to sounds others might miss. He waited, listening past the whisper of falling snow and creaking pine branches. There it was again, not quite a whimper, more like a shallow, struggling breath. Robert abandoned the wheelbarrow and moved toward the tree line at the edge of his property, boots crunching through fresh powder. The sound led him to a gnarled old pine where the snow had been disturbed around its base. What he found made his weathered face harden. A German shepherd puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, tied to the tree trunk with a yellow nylon rope. The pup's black and tan coat was dusted with snow, its tiny body trembling violently. Its eyes, amber and startlingly aware, watched Robert approach without hope or fear. Only resignation. "Jesus Christ," Robert muttered, kneeling beside the animal. The rope had been tied deliberately tight, cutting into the puppy's neck, the knot complex and purposeful. This wasn't an accident or a lost pet. Someone had wanted this animal to suffer. Robert's fingers, stiff from cold and arthritis, worked at the knot. The puppy made no sound as he worked, only shivered beneath his touch. When the rope finally gave way, Robert noticed raw, bleeding marks around the small neck. Without hesitation, he unzipped his jacket and tucked the puppy inside, against his flannel shirt where his body heat might help. "You're all right now," he said, his voice rough from disuse. The puppy remained limp, offering neither resistance nor response. Its body felt too light, bones too prominent beneath the soft fur. Robert cradled it with one arm as he gathered a few logs with the other. The woodpile could wait. This couldn't. The walk back to the house seemed longer with precious cargo. Robert's mind, usually blank or focused on practical matters, filled with questions. Who would do this? Why on his property? How long had the pup been out here? The snow was falling harder now, beginning to obscure his earlier footprints. Eleanor was in the kitchen when he entered, her copper hair still tousled from sleep, hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Her eyes widened as Robert carefully unzipped his jacket. "Robert, what on earth?" she began, then gasped as he revealed the puppy, found him tied to a tree, deliberately. Robert said, his words clipped as he gently placed the animal on a clean dish towel on the counter. "Need warm water. And call Dr. Cooper." Eleanor's initial shock gave way to efficiency. As a teacher, she'd handled many emergencies over the years. She filled a bowl with lukewarm water while dialing the veterinarian with her free hand. Robert watched her explain the situation, his rough fingers gently examining the puppy for other injuries. "Sarah can see us right away," Eleanor said after hanging up. She approached cautiously, her expression a mixture of concern and something else. Hesitation, perhaps. They hadn't had a dog since James's old retriever died 3 years after their son. Will he make it?" Robert met her eyes. "Don't know, but he deserves a chance." Eleanor nodded, then retrieved a soft blanket from the living room. Together, they wrapped the puppy, who had yet to make a sound. Robert held him as Eleanor drove their truck into town, the windshield wipers struggling to keep pace with the thickening snowfall. Dr. Sarah Cooper was waiting at the clinic door. In her mid-30s, with practical dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, she'd taken over the practice from her father 5 years earlier. Her eyes sharp and assessing immediately focused on the bundle in Robert's arms. "Bring him straight back," she said, leading them to an examination room. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Sarah worked methodically, checking vital signs, administering fluids, cleaning wounds. The diagnosis was grim, but not hopeless. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, infected rope burns, and hypothermia. Through it all, the puppy remained silent, his amber eyes occasionally opening to track the movements around him. "He's a fighter," Sarah said finally, adjusting the IV drip. "But whoever did this—" She hesitated, looking at Robert. "They meant business. This wasn't neglect. It was deliberate cruelty." Robert nodded once, his jaw tight. "There's something else," Sarah added, reaching for a small handheld device. "Let me check for a microchip." She ran the scanner over the puppy's shoulder blades. A soft beep broke the room's silence. "He's chipped," she said, surprised. "Registered just 3 weeks ago to someone named Lily Peterson. Address is right here in Claremont." Robert's face went still. Eleanor's hand found his arm, squeezing gently. "Lily," Eleanor whispered. "James's Lily." Robert didn't answer, but the sudden tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. After 20 years of silence, the past had suddenly arrived on his doorstep in the form of a dying puppy and a name he'd tried very hard to forget. Robert stood on a narrow porch, staring at a faded blue door with peeling paint. The small rental house sat at the edge of town where property values dropped along with expectations. A potted plant dead from early frost remained by the door like a forgotten sentinel. His truck waited at the curb, Eleanor having opted to stay at the clinic with the puppy. 20 years. 20 years since he'd seen Lily Peterson. 20 years since the funeral where she'd stood apart from everyone. Her young face hollow with grief no 19-year-old should know. 20 years since the whispers started that maybe, just maybe, she knew more about the accident than she'd told the police. Robert knocked, the sound sharp in the quiet neighborhood. Snowflakes drifted lazily around him, nothing like the urgent flurries from earlier. He'd removed his wedding band before leaving the clinic, a deliberate choice Eleanor had watched without comment. The door opened, and time collapsed. Lily Peterson had aged, of course. The girl was now a woman of 39, her once wild chestnut hair now shorter, streaked with premature gray. Her face had thinned, cheekbones more pronounced, but her eyes remained the same startling blue that had first caught his son's attention at a high school football game. Those eyes widened as they registered who stood before her. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lily." His own voice sounded strange to his ears. She seemed to compose herself, wrapping a gray cardigan tighter around her slender frame. "Would you like to come in?" The living room was sparsely furnished, a worn couch, a coffee table with water rings, bookshelves made of cinder blocks and pine boards. No photographs adorned the walls, no mementos cluttered the surfaces, It was the home of someone who didn't fully believe in permanence. "I found your dog," Robert said, declining to sit when she gestured to the couch. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. "Max! You found Max!" Hope and disbelief battled in her expression. Is he alive?" "Barely." Robert watched her reaction carefully. "Someone tied him to a tree on my property, left him to die in the snow." The color drained from Lily's face. She sank onto the couch, legs seeming to give way. "Oh, God," she whispered. I thought he'd just run away." Robert remained standing, his posture military straight. Dog didn't run anywhere. He was tied with a specialized knot. Deliberate. "Derek," she said, the name falling from her lips like something bitter. She looked up at Robert, tears forming. "Derek Stevens, my ex. He was jealous of everything, even a puppy." "Tell me," Robert said. "Not a request, but a command." Lily drew a shaky breath. "I've been back in Claremont for 6 months, trying to start over after a bad relationship in Seattle. The shelter said Max needed someone quiet, patient, said he'd been rescued from a bad situation." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Ironic. Right. Rescued just to end up—" She couldn't finish. "Derek Stevens," Robert prompted. "He showed up 3 weeks ago, said he'd followed me from Seattle. He was drunk, angry that I'd replaced him with—" She gestured helplessly. "With a dog. We argued. I told him to leave. The next morning, Max was gone. I looked everywhere, put up posters. After a week—" Her voice broke. "I thought he was dead." Robert studied her, seeing glimpses of the girl his son had loved in this broken woman. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Fear flickered across her face. "Derek has friends in the department, and he said if I reported him for anything, he'd—" She swallowed. "Let's just say I believed his threats." Robert thought of the puppy fighting for his life at the clinic, of the deliberate cruelty of leaving an animal to slowly die. Anger and emotion he'd carefully controlled for decades began to simmer beneath his calm exterior. "Where is he now, Derek?" Lily hesitated. "He works at Stevens Auto Body. His uncle's place off Highway 15. She stood suddenly. "Please, can I see Max? I need to know he's okay." Robert considered her request. "He's at Cooper's clinic, critical condition." He turned toward the door, then paused. "You were with my son the night before he died." The statement hung in the air between them. Lily's face crumpled slightly. "Yes," she whispered. "We argued that night, about college, about leaving Montana." Her eyes met his, swimming with old grief. "I never got to tell him I was sorry." Robert nodded once, then left, without another word. Stevens Auto Body sat a mile outside town limits, a corrugated metal building with a gravel lot full of vehicles in various states of disrepair. Robert parked his truck across the street behind a stand of bare-branched cottonwoods. He watched the garage for nearly 30 minutes, cataloging movements, counting employees, noting security cameras. 2 mechanics worked on vehicles in the open bays. Neither matched the description Lily had given of Derek, 6 foot, heavy set, with a sleeve of tattoos on his right arm. Robert was about to leave when a black pickup truck pulled into the lot. The man who emerged matched Derek's description perfectly. Robert waited until Derek disappeared inside, then crossed the street. The side of the building offered a clear view into the office without being immediately visible from inside. Through the window, he could see Derek arguing with an older man, presumably his uncle. Their gestures were animated, faces flushed with anger. Movement near the back of the property caught Robert's attention. A chain-link enclosure stood partially hidden behind a stack of old tires. Inside, water bowls had frozen over. A familiar yellow rope hung from a hook on the fence. Robert circled behind the building, staying low. The enclosure's gate was secured with a padlock, but through the links, he could see more evidence: dog food scattered on the ground, a torn collar, distinctive paw prints in patches of mud. He took photographs with his phone, documenting everything. As he prepared to leave, a voice called out, "Hey, what are you doing back there?" Robert turned slowly to face Derek Stevens, younger than expected, maybe early 40s, with the thick build of someone who relied on intimidation. A tattoo of barbed wire circled his thick neck. "Looking for parts," Robert replied evenly. "For an old Ford." Derek's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Parts department's inside. This is private property." "My mistake." Robert made no move to leave. Derek stepped closer, aggression in every line of his body. "Do I know you, old man?" "No," Robert said, "but I know you." Something in Robert's tone made Derek hesitate. His eyes flicked to the enclosure, then back to Robert's impassive face. "You should leave. Now." "Found a puppy this morning," Robert said conversationally, though his eyes remained hard. "German shepherd. Someone tied him to a tree in the snow. Left him to die slow." Derek's expression flickered surprise, then calculated blankness. "What's that got to do with me?" "Same yellow rope." Robert nodded toward the fence. "Same knot we used in the military. Specialized, not common knowledge." Derek's posture shifted subtly into a fighting stance. "You threatening me?" "Just making conversation." Robert turned to leave, then paused. "Puppy had a microchip, registered to Lily Peterson." He watched Derek's reaction carefully. "Remember her?" A muscle jumped in Derek's jaw. "Get off my property before I call the cops." Robert nodded once and walked away, feeling Derek's eyes boring into his back. He didn't look back, didn't hurry his steps. In the truck, he examined the photos he'd taken, then made 2 calls, one to Eleanor at the clinic and one to Sheriff William Blackwood, his former platoon mate from Desert Storm. As he drove toward town, light snow began falling again. Robert's mind was clear, focused in a way it hadn't been in years. The puppy Max was just a symptom of something larger. And Robert Mitchell had spent enough time in war zones to recognize when something evil had taken root. The next 7 days unfolded in a rhythm dictated by Max's recovery. Dr. Cooper had insisted on keeping him at the clinic for the first 3 nights, monitoring his temperature and ensuring the infection from his neck wounds didn't spread. Robert visited twice daily, dawn and dusk, sitting beside the metal kennel, his rough hand occasionally reaching through the bars to offer a gentle touch. He rarely spoke during these visits, but his eyes never left the puppy's thin form. Eleanor came too, bringing homemade treats for the clinic staff and small toys for Max that he was still too weak to play with. On the 4th day, when Sarah deemed Max stable enough to leave, it was Eleanor who had prepared their home. creating a soft bed near the fireplace, and researching the best foods for a recovering puppy. "You're sure about this?" Sarah asked, as she helped Robert settle Max into a carrier for the drive home. "He'll need constant attention, medication every 6 hours. He's still not out of the woods." "We're sure," Eleanor answered before Robert could speak. Something in her tone made both Robert and Sarah glance up. A determination had settled in Eleanor's eyes, a purposefulness neither had seen in years. Max remained unnervingly silent during the drive home. No whimpers, no barks, only watchful amber eyes tracking every movement, every change in scenery. Robert drove while Eleanor sat in the back seat beside the carrier, her fingers occasionally slipping through the grate to stroke Max's head. "He doesn't make a sound," she murmured. "Not even when Sarah was treating his wounds." Robert met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "He learned not to." The simple statement hung between them, carrying implications neither wanted to voice. By the time they reached the farmhouse, snow was falling again, soft and steady in the fading afternoon light. Robert carried Max's carrier into the house, while Eleanor hurried ahead to prepare the space they'd created for him, a padded bed near the fireplace, positioned to catch its warmth without overheating. They'd agreed to keep him confined to the living room and kitchen initially. Using baby gates Eleanor had unearthed from the attic where they'd been stored since James was a toddler. When Robert opened the carrier door, Max didn't move. He simply watched, those amber eyes assessing whether this new environment held the same dangers as previous ones. Robert didn't rush him, didn't coax or command. He simply stepped back, giving the puppy space to decide for himself. It took nearly 20 minutes before Max ventured out, his movements cautious and measured. He sniffed each new area thoroughly before proceeding, his body language still wary but showing the first hints of curiosity. When he finally reached the bed Eleanor had prepared, he circled it 3 times before settling, his head remaining up and alert. "Progress," Eleanor whispered from where she stood in the kitchen doorway, unwilling to move closer and startle him. That night established their new pattern. Robert slept on the couch instead of upstairs in their bedroom, unwilling to leave Max alone in a strange place. Eleanor brought down pillows and a quilt, setting up the armchair for herself without discussion. They slept in the living room together, the 3 of them, while the snow continued to fall outside and the fire gradually died to embers. By morning, Max had moved from his bed to a position just beside the couch, close enough to sense Robert's presence but not touching a calculated distance that spoke volumes about his past experiences. The physical recovery came first. Max's wounds began to heal, the raw circle around his neck gradually scabbing over. His ribs, once starkly visible beneath his coat, became less pronounced as he accepted small, frequent meals. Dr. Cooper's twice-weekly checkups confirmed he was gaining weight, fighting off infection, growing stronger. The emotional healing proved more challenging. Certain sounds sent Max scrambling for cover, the metallic clang of the fireplace tools, the rumble of trucks passing on the distant highway, the slam of a cabinet door. He would flatten himself against the floor or wedge his body into the smallest available space, trembling violently until the perceived danger passed. Eleanor, drawing on decades of experience with troubled children, began a methodical desensitization program. She played recordings of triggering sounds at low volume during mealtimes, gradually increasing the volume as Max learned to associate them with safety rather than threat. Robert contributed in his own way, his calm, steady presence becoming a touchstone for the puppy. "He watches you," Eleanor observed one evening as Robert sat reading in his armchair, Max curled nearby. "He's always tracking where you are in the room." Robert glanced up from his book. "Checking his exits, making sure he can predict what's coming." Eleanor studied her husband's face. "You did the same thing. After you came back from your second tour." Robert said nothing, but his eyes held hers for a moment longer than usual acknowledgement, without words. Meanwhile, the investigation into Derek Stevens proceeded with the methodical pace of small-town law enforcement. Sheriff Blackwood— "Call me Will. For Christ's sake, Robert, we've known each other 30 years. Had taken Robert's evidence seriously, but cautioned patience. "We're building a case," he explained during one of his regular stops at the Mitchell farm. A bear of a man with a silver-streaked beard and the permanent squint of someone who spent too much time in the sun. Will had known Robert since basic training. "Animal cruelty's a felony in Montana now, but we need more than circumstantial evidence." "He'll do it again," Robert said simply, watching through the window as Eleanor walked Max around the yard on his new leash, keeping a careful distance from the tree line where he'd been found. Will followed his gaze. "How's the little guy doing?" "Better. Still doesn't make a sound." "And you— how are you doing with all this?" Robert turned, his expression questioning. Will shrugged massive shoulders. "Eleanor called me. Said you've been up most nights. Said you're tracking Stevens' movements." Robert's jaw tightened. "She shouldn't worry." "But she does." Will's voice softened. "Look, I've got deputies watching Stevens. He's not going anywhere we don't know about. You focus on that dog and your wife. Let me handle the rest." Robert nodded once, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. After Will left, Robert checked his phone, an old flip model he kept charged mainly for emergencies. 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. No messages. He pocketed the phone without calling back and went to join Eleanor and Max in the yard. The breakthrough with Max came unexpectedly. A week after they'd brought him home, Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing dinner while Robert repaired a leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom. Max had taken to following Robert from room to room, maintaining his careful distance but clearly preferring to keep the man in sight. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Robert emerged from the bathroom to see a vehicle he didn't recognize pulling up the drive, a blue sedan with rental car plates. The driver's door opened, and Lily Peterson stepped out, hugging herself against the cold. "Robert," Eleanor called from the kitchen. "Someone's here." Before he could respond, Max's behavior changed dramatically. His ears flattened against his head, his body lowered to the ground, and for the first time since they'd found him, he made a sound, a low, rumbling growl that started deep in his chest. Robert looked down in surprise, then back at the window. Lily was approaching the porch. But she wasn't alone. A man had emerged from the passenger side, tall, broad-shouldered, with the distinctive barbed wire tattoo visible even at this distance. Derek Stevens had come to the Mitchell farm. "Eleanor," Robert called, his voice unnaturally calm. "Take Max to the bedroom, lock the door, call Will." Something in his tone must have conveyed the urgency. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening as she saw the visitors through the window. Without a word, she scooped up Max, who was now trembling violently, and hurried upstairs. Robert opened the front door before they could knock, positioning himself squarely in the doorway. Lily looked nervous, her eyes darting between Robert and the man beside her. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, her voice strained. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced. I wanted to see Max, and I told her I should come apologize in person." Derek interrupted, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Derek Stevens, I understand there's been a misunderstanding about Lily's dog." Robert didn't take the offered hand. "No misunderstanding." Derek's smile faltered slightly. "Look, I know how this must seem, but I never meant to hurt the animal. I just took him from Lily's yard, tied him to a tree in a snowstorm, left him to die." Robert's voice remained even, but his eyes had taken on the hard focus of a soldier assessing a threat. "It wasn't like that," Derek insisted, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "I was angry. Sure. Did something stupid. But I came back for him later. He was already gone. I've been looking everywhere." Robert studied the man before him, the careful construction of his story, the calculated sincerity in his expression. He'd interrogated enough people to recognize the signs of practiced deception. "Why my property?" Robert asked. Derek blinked, momentarily thrown. "What? Why tie him on my land miles from town? Land that's been in my family for generations." Lily was looking at Derek now, too, confusion evident on her face. Derek recovered quickly. "I didn't know it was your land. Man, I just drove until I found a quiet spot. Pure coincidence." "Coincidence," Robert repeated, the word flat and disbelieving. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Finally, Lily spoke up, her voice small. "Can I see Max? Please, I've been so worried." Before Robert could answer, the sound of a vehicle approaching drew their attention. Sheriff Blackwood's patrol SUV pulled up behind the blue sedan, lights flashing but no siren. Will emerged, adjusting his hat as he approached. "Afternoon, folks," he said pleasantly, though his eyes were sharp as they assessed the situation. "Everything all right here, Robert, Sheriff." Derek nodded, his demeanor instantly shifting to respectful citizen. "Just stopping by to check on Lily's dog, clear up a misunderstanding." Will's gaze moved from Derek to Robert, then back. "That right funny timing. I was just coming to talk to Robert about some evidence that came in, about a dog that was abused." He turned to Derek. "You have any thoughts on that?" "Mr. Stevens," Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Like I was telling Mr. Mitchell, I made a mistake with the dog, but I never meant to harm him. I came back for him. After leaving him to freeze to death," Robert said quietly. "I wasn't thinking straight," Derek insisted. "Lily and I had a fight." "We didn't fight," Lily interrupted suddenly. "You broke into my house. You threatened me." Her voice shook, but she continued, looking at Will. "He said he'd kill Max if I ever left him again." Derek's expression darkened. "That's not true. She's making that up." Will stepped closer, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Mr. Stevens, I'd like you to come down to the station to answer some questions." "Am I under arrest?" Derek challenged. Not at this moment, but we can change that if you prefer. Derek looked from Will to Robert to Lily, calculation visible in his eyes. Finally, he shrugged with artificial casualness. Fine. Happy to clear this up. He turned to Lily. We'll talk later. The threat in those 3 words was unmistakable. Robert felt something cold settle in his stomach, a familiar sensation from his military days. The recognition of a danger greater than initially assessed. After Will escorted Derek to the patrol car, Lily remained on the porch, arms wrapped around herself as if for protection. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know he'd bring me here. He showed up at my work, said he wanted to make things right." Robert studied her pale face. "You're afraid of him?" It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "He found me in Seattle, too, after I left him the first time. That's why I came back to Claremont. I thought he wouldn't look for me in the last place I'd want to be." The implication hung between them that Claremont held too many painful memories for her to choose it willingly. "Max is upstairs with Eleanor," Robert said finally. "He's recovering. But he's not the same dog you knew." Relief flooded Lily's face. "Can I see him? Just for a minute?" Robert hesitated, then nodded once. "Wait here." He found Eleanor and Max in the master bedroom. Eleanor sitting on the floor beside the bed where Max had wedged himself into the narrow space between mattress and wall. "He's terrified," she whispered. "Started shaking as soon as he heard that man's voice." Robert knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Max," he said softly. "It's all right now." The puppy's eyes found his, dilated with fear but recognizing the voice. Robert didn't try to reach for him, didn't invade his safe space. He simply remained there, a steady presence offering security. "Lily wants to see him," he told Eleanor. "Derek's gone with Will." Eleanor's expression hardened, a rare look for her usually gentle face. "That man left this puppy to die. Robert, deliberately." "I know. And there's something else. Something you're not telling me about him." Robert met his wife's eyes. After 43 years of marriage, there was little point in deception. "He knows things he shouldn't, about our land, about us." Eleanor absorbed this, then nodded. "Bring Lily up, but if Max doesn't want to see her, she leaves." Lily entered the bedroom tentatively, her eyes immediately finding the space where Max had hidden himself. "Oh, Max," she breathed, dropping to her knees several feet away. "I'm so sorry." To everyone's surprise, Max emerged slightly from his hiding place, nose working as he caught Lily's scent. His body language remained tense, but there was recognition in his eyes. "He remembers you," Eleanor said. Lily extended her hand slowly, palm down, allowing Max to approach if he chose. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, cautiously, he crept forward until his nose touched her fingertips. The contact lasted only seconds before he retreated to his safe space. But it was unmistakably deliberate. "Thank you," Lily whispered, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "For saving him, for giving him a home." Robert watched the interaction from the doorway, his mind working through connections he'd been avoiding. Lily Peterson, Derek Stevens. his property specifically, the calculated cruelty of the act. None of it felt random, as if reading his thoughts. Lily looked up at him. "There's something else you should know. About Derek." She swallowed hard. "He's been asking questions. About James. About the accident." The room seemed still, the air suddenly thick with 2 decades of unspoken grief. "What kind of questions?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. Lily's eyes dropped to her hands. "About where it happened. Who was there?" She hesitated. "He asked if anyone ever found James's phone." Robert and Eleanor exchanged a look heavy with significance. James's phone had never been recovered from the accident scene, a detail not included in public reports. "Why would he care about that?" Eleanor asked. Lily shook her head. "I don't know, but he was excited when I said it was never found." She looked up at Robert. "I think that's why he left Max on your property. He wanted to send a message." "What message?" Eleanor pressed. "That he can take things from people, things they love." Lily's voice broke. "That's what he does." The implications settled over the room like a physical weight. Max, sensing the tension, emerged from his hiding place and moved cautiously to Robert's side, pressing against his leg in a gesture that was part seeking protection, part offering solidarity. It was the first time the puppy had initiated contact with either of them. Robert looked down, meeting those amber eyes that had seen too much suffering in their short time. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared experience, of survival. "You should stay somewhere else for a while," Robert told Lily as they walked her to her car later. Derek had been released after questioning. Will explained by phone. Insufficient evidence to hold him. Lily nodded. "I'm going to my cousin's in Missoula tomorrow. Just need to pack a few things." "Tonight?" Robert insisted. "Pack now. Go straight there." She studied his face, then nodded again, understanding the urgency behind his words. "What about Max?" "He stays with us." As they watched her drive away, Eleanor slipped her hand into Robert's, a gesture so natural yet so rare in recent years that it momentarily startled him. "This isn't just about a puppy anymore, is it?" she asked. Robert squeezed her hand gently. "No, I don't think it ever was." The confrontation came 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon when low clouds hung heavy over the mountains, promising more snow by nightfall. Robert had spent the morning reinforcing the fence line around the property, checking gates, installing the security cameras Sheriff Blackwood had loaned him as a precaution. Eleanor had taken Max to his follow-up appointment at Dr. Cooper's clinic, the puppy now comfortable enough to ride in the truck without trembling, though he still maintained his unnerving silence. Robert was securing the last camera near the driveway entrance when a black pickup truck slowed on the county road, then turned onto his property. He recognized it immediately from Stephen's auto body, the same vehicle he'd seen Derek driving. Robert straightened, hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm that hadn't been there in 15 years. He forced himself to relax, to appear casual as the truck approached. Derek parked 20 yards away and emerged unhurried, as if visiting an old friend. He wore oil-stained jeans and a heavy canvas jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Despite the casual attire, there was nothing relaxed in his posture or the calculated way his gaze swept the property. "Mitchell?" he called. approaching with hands visible at his sides, a deliberate gesture that Robert noted with professional interest. "Got a minute to talk?" "About what?" Robert remained where he stood, one hand resting on the fence post, body angled to maintain clear sight lines around the property. Derek stopped a respectful distance away. "About Lily. About your dog." A pause. Then, "About your son." Robert felt a cold stillness settle over him, the combat calm he'd developed in war zones, where emotion became a liability. "My son died 20 years ago." "Did he?" Derek's mouth curved in what might have been a smile on another man. On him, it resembled a predator's display of teeth. "Because I've been hearing some interesting stories around town about how nobody ever found his body in that car, how the search was called off too soon." "There was no body to find," Robert said evenly. "River took him downstream. Sheriff's department dragged for 2 weeks." Derek nodded as if this confirmed something. "But they never found his phone either. Funny thing about phones, they store all kinds of secrets. Messages, photos." He tilted his head. "The truth." Robert studied the man before him, seeing beyond the practiced intimidation to something more calculated. Derek Stevens wasn't just a small-town abuser. He was probing for information, testing reactions, like an interrogator. "What do you want?" Robert asked bluntly. Derek's expression shifted, dropping the pretense of casual conversation. "I want what belongs to me, the dog, and Lily. Neither belongs to you. See? That's where you're wrong." Derek took a step closer. "Lily's been mine since Seattle. The dog was just a message she didn't get. Now I'm having to be more direct by trespassing on my property, threatening me." Robert's voice remained calm, but his stance had subtly shifted into a defensive position, weight evenly distributed, hands relaxed but ready. Derek's eyes narrowed. "Not threatening, explaining." He glanced toward the house. Nice place, isolated, lots of land. His eyes returned to Robert's face. "Would be a shame if something happened to it, or to your wife, or that dog you seem so attached to." The threat hung in the air between them, naked and deliberate. Robert felt something shift inside him. A door opening to a part of himself he'd kept locked away since returning from his last deployment. The part that had been trained to neutralize threats efficiently and without hesitation. "You should leave," Robert said, his voice dropping to a register that had once made new recruits snap to attention. Derek didn't move. "Your son knew things he shouldn't. Started asking questions about certain operations in this county. Made himself a problem." His smile widened. "Problems get solved in my line of work." The implication struck Robert like a physical blow, but decades of discipline kept his expression neutral. "What line of work is that?" "Exactly. Let's call it distribution. Moving products from people who have them to people who want them." Derek spread his hands. "Lily stumbled into it when she started dating your boy. Got too close to things. Had to be. Managed. By killing my son." The words emerged calm, despite the storm building inside him. Derek's eyes glittered. "Accidents happen every day, especially on mountain roads in the dark." Robert had interrogated enough men to recognize when someone was revealing too much, deliberately creating a reaction, establishing leverage. Derek wanted him angry, wanted him emotional and impulsive. The realization steadied him. "You've got quite an imagination," Robert said. "But you're still trespassing." Frustration flickered across Derek's face. The reaction hadn't been what he expected. "I'm not leaving without what's mine. Tell Lily I want to meet. Tonight. The old Blackwater Bridge where your boy took his last swim." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Bring the dog, too, as a show of good faith." "Or what?" Derek's smile returned. "Or the next accident might involve your wife, Eleanor. Right. Still drives that blue Ford pickup. Still takes the canyon road to town 3 times a week." The surveillance implied in those details sent a cold wave through Robert's body. Derek had been watching them, tracking their movements, planning. Before Robert could respond, the sound of approaching tires made them both turn. Sheriff Blackwood's patrol SUV appeared on the county road, followed closely by Eleanor's truck. Robert felt a flash of relief mixed with fresh concern. Eleanor wasn't supposed to return for another hour. Derek stepped back, reverting instantly to casual posture. "Think about what I said. Mitchell, tonight. Blackwater Bridge, 8 o'clock. He turned and walked back to his truck, raising a hand in mock salute to the approaching vehicles. "Evening, Sheriff. Ma'am." Will slowed his SUV as Derek's truck passed, the 2 men exchanging a long look before Derek accelerated away down the county road. Eleanor pulled up next to Robert, her face tight with concern. "Was that Derek Stevens?" she asked as she climbed out of the truck. Max peered from the passenger window, ears alert, body tense. "Yes," Robert confirmed. "Will, did you follow Eleanor here?" The sheriff nodded, his expression grim as he approached. "Got a call from Dr. Cooper. Said a man was asking about Eleanor's appointment time. Described Derek. Thought it best to escort her home." Eleanor moved to open the passenger door, helping Max down from the seat. The puppy went immediately to Robert's side, pressing against his leg in what had become his characteristic gesture of seeking security. Despite his still healing injuries and small size, there was something protective in the way he positioned himself between Robert and the direction Derek had gone. "What did he want?" Will asked, voice low. Robert glanced at Eleanor, who was watching them with the intuitive awareness of a woman who had spent decades reading her husband's unspoken thoughts. "Let's talk inside." Once in the kitchen, with Max settled in his new bed near the wood stove, Robert recounted his conversation with Derek. Eleanor's face paled at the mention of James, her hands gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles whitened. "He implied he was involved in James's accident," Robert concluded. "Said James was asking questions about some kind of distribution operation." Will removed his hat, setting it on the table with deliberate care. "Drug trafficking," he said heavily. "We've had suspicions about the Stevens family for years. Nothing solid enough for charges, but too many coincidences to ignore. Young people overdosing, unexplained wealth, connections to suppliers in Canada and Washington." "And James found out something," Eleanor whispered. "That's why—" She couldn't finish. Will nodded slowly. "It's possible. James was working that summer internship with the county surveyor's office. They were mapping properties all over the county, including some remote areas where we've suspected activity." "Why are you only telling us this now?" Robert demanded, a rare edge entering his voice. "Because until now, it was just speculation." Will met his old friend's gaze steadily. "And because you two were barely holding it together after losing him, what good would it have done to suggest it might not have been an accident without proof?" The kitchen fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Robert spoke. "He wants to meet tonight. Blackwater Bridge. 8 o'clock. Eleanor inhaled sharply. "The place where James—" "Yes. It's a trap," Will said immediately. "He's trying to isolate you. Get you alone." "I know." Robert's voice was calm, his expression unreadable. "That's why I'm going." "The hell you are," Will countered. "This is police business now. If Stevens is confessing to involvement in James's death, that's a homicide investigation. You said yourself you've never had enough evidence against the Stevens family," Robert pointed out. "And now Derek's threatening Eleanor, threatening Max." He looked at his wife. "I won't let anything happen to you." Eleanor crossed the kitchen to stand before him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "This isn't Afghanistan. Robert, you're not a soldier anymore." "No," he agreed. "But I am a father. And someone just confessed to killing our son." The raw emotion in those words, the first time in 20 years Robert had directly addressed James's death with such openness, silenced both Eleanor and Will. After a moment, Will sighed heavily. "If you're determined to do this, you're not doing it alone." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling in some help. Deputies I trust. We'll set up surveillance at the bridge before you arrive." "He'll be watching for that," Robert warned. "Then we'll be extra careful," Will insisted. "I've known you too long to think I can talk you out of this, but I'm not letting you walk into an ambush unprepared." As the two men discussed strategy, Eleanor knelt beside Max's bed, gently stroking his head. The puppy watched the conversation with uncanny attentiveness, as if understanding the gravity of what was being planned. "He knows," she said softly, interrupting the men. "Max, he understands something's happening." Robert and Will turned to look at the German Shepherd puppy, who had risen to a sitting position, his amber eyes fixed on Robert with an intensity that seemed beyond his few months of life. "He's connected to this somehow," Eleanor continued. "Finding him led us to Derek, led us to the truth about James after all these years." Her eyes filled with tears. "It can't be coincidence." Robert crossed to kneel beside her, his hand joining hers on Max's soft fur. The puppy leaned into their touch, a small gesture of trust that had been hard-won over the past days. "It's not coincidence," Robert agreed. "But I don't think it's fate either." He looked at his wife. "It's about choices. Derek chose cruelty. We chose compassion." His voice softened. "You chose to bring Max home, even though it meant reopening old wounds." The moment was interrupted by Will's phone ringing. He stepped into the living room to take the call, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "That was the station. Derek Stevens just came in to file a report." Will's eyes met Robert's. "He's claiming you threatened him. Says you accused him of stealing your dog and threatened to kill him if he came near your property again." "That's absurd," Eleanor protested. "Robert would never—" "It's a setup," Robert interrupted calmly. "He's creating a record, establishing a narrative in case something happens." Will nodded grimly. "Exactly what I was thinking. He's planning something for tonight, and whatever it is, he wants to make sure you look like the aggressor." Eleanor's hand tightened around Robert's. "You can't go to that bridge. Please." Before Robert could respond, Max suddenly stood, a low growl emanating from his throat, the first aggressive sound they'd heard from him. His attention was fixed on the window overlooking the front yard, ears forward, body tense. Robert moved to the window, peering through the gathering dusk. At first, he saw nothing. Then, a flicker of movement near the tree line caught his attention, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness beneath the pines. Someone was watching the house. "Will," Robert said quietly. "South corner of the property, by the big pine." The sheriff joined him at the window, squinting into the dimness. After a moment, he nodded. "I see him." He reached for his sidearm. "Stay here. Lock the doors behind me." As Will slipped out the back door, Robert turned to Eleanor. "Get Max. Go upstairs to our bedroom. Lock the door and don't open it unless you hear my voice or Will's." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before gathering Max into her arms. The puppy went willingly, though his eyes remained fixed on Robert with an expression that seemed almost human in its concern. "Be careful," Eleanor whispered, pressing a quick kiss to her husband's cheek before hurrying upstairs. Robert moved through the house methodically, checking locks, drawing curtains. From a locked cabinet in his office, he retrieved a key, then knelt to open the gun safe concealed beneath the floorboards, a precaution from years of living isolated with valuable farming equipment. The Colt 1911 had been his service weapon, legally registered and maintained even after retirement. He checked it with the automatic motions of decades of training, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought faltered. As he loaded the magazine, a strange calm settled over him, not the emptiness of depression that had been his companion for 20 years, but the focused alertness of a soldier with a clear mission: protect his family, find the truth. After 20 years of drifting in grief's purgatory, Robert Mitchell finally had a purpose again, and somewhere in the gathering darkness outside, the man responsible for his son's death was waiting. The first gunshot shattered the twilight silence. Robert dropped to a crouch beside the living room window, automatically calculating angle and distance approximately 200 yards, near the old oak at the property line. A rifle, not a handgun. The second shot followed 3 seconds later, striking the porch railing with a spray of splintered wood. "Eleanor," Robert called, keeping low as he moved toward the stairs. "Stay down, away from windows." "We're okay." Her voice drifted down, tense but controlled. In the background, he could hear Max making his first genuine sounds since they'd found him, a series of high-pitched whines punctuated by sharp, protective barks. Outside, he caught a glimpse of Will's uniform as the sheriff took cover behind Robert's truck, service weapon drawn, no sign of backup yet. Another shot rang out, shattering the kitchen window, sending glass cascading across the tile floor. Whoever was firing was moving, circling the property with concerning familiarity. Robert's military training took over, assessing threats, cataloging resources, formulating a response. The house had 3 exits: front door, back door, cellar hatch, limited visibility due to fading light and encroaching forest, unknown number of hostiles, though Derek was the likely shooter. Moving to the kitchen, Robert kept below window level. Retrieving his phone from the counter, Will had given him his private number years ago, rarely used until now. The sheriff answered on the first ring. "South side of the house," Robert said without preamble. "Shooters moving counterclockwise. Rifle, not handgun. Knows the property layout. Backup's 10 minutes out," Will replied, his voice tight. "Stevens's truck is parked a quarter-mile down the road. I counted at least 2 sets of footprints leading into your property. He's not alone." "No." "Can you get Eleanor and the dog to the storm cellar?" Robert considered. The cellar entrance was outside, 10 yards from the back door, exposed ground to cover. Too risky. Better fortified upstairs. Fewer angles of approach. "Robert," Will's voice lowered, "this isn't just about the dog anymore. This is a coordinated attack. They came prepared to kill." "I know." Robert checked his watch. 6:47 p.m. The meeting at Blackwater Bridge was a diversion, never the real plan. "Can you make it to the house?" "Working on it. Stay on the line." Robert heard Will's measured breathing as the sheriff assessed his options. Another shot struck the side of the house, this one higher, aiming for second-floor windows. Eleanor's gasp was audible even from downstairs. "I'm moving," Will said suddenly. "Cover the north side window if you can. On my count. 3, 2, 1. Robert rose just enough to see through the window, the Colt steady in his hands. Will's bulky form sprinted across the open space between the truck and the porch, surprisingly fast for his size. Movement flickered at the tree line, a shadowy figure raising what could only be a rifle. Robert aimed and fired twice in rapid succession, not to hit, but to disrupt, to distract. It worked. The figure ducked back into cover as Will reached the porch, the heavy front door opening and closing in one fluid motion. The sheriff leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "Saw 2 of them," he confirmed, checking his weapon. "Derek for sure. Second guy, smaller, wearing camouflage. His uncle maybe, or cousin. Family business." Robert kept his voice neutral despite the implications. The Stevens family had escalated from threats to attempted murder in a matter of hours. They were eliminating loose ends, starting with the Mitchells. "We need to get a message to the backup units," Will said. "They're heading into an ambush if they come in blind." Robert nodded toward the shattered kitchen window. "Shooters have the house surrounded. Phone lines are down. Cell reception's always been spotty out here. I've got a radio in my vehicle. Too exposed. They'll be watching it." Will's expression hardened. "What's your play here?" "Robert, we can't just wait them out. Not with Eleanor and the dog upstairs." Before Robert could answer, a new sound cut through the tense silence. An engine. Revving hard, approaching fast. Both men moved to different windows, Will taking the front while Robert covered the side yard. A battered pickup truck crashed through the wooden fence, headlights illuminating the yard in harsh relief as it accelerated toward the house. "Get back!" Robert shouted, grabbing Will's shoulder and pulling him away from the window seconds before the truck slammed into the front porch. The impact shook the entire house, the sound of splintering wood and twisting metal thunderous in the confined space. "Eleanor," Robert called, already moving toward the stairs. "Are you all right?" "Yes." Her voice was steady, though strained. "What was that? Stay where you are. Keep Max with you." The front of the house was now compromised. The porch partially collapsed where the truck had struck it. Through the dust and debris, Robert could make out 2 figures approaching, one larger, one smaller, both carrying weapons. Derek Stevens and his accomplice, using the crashed truck as cover. "They're making entry," Will said grimly, positioning himself at the foot of the stairs. "This is Sheriff Blackwood," he shouted. "Drop your weapons and stand down. Backup is en route." The only response was a shot that embedded itself in the wall inches from Will's head. Robert moved to the kitchen, seeking an angle that would give him advantage without exposing himself. The back door remained secure for now, but it was only a matter of time before the attackers circled around. "Will," Robert said quietly, "there's a gun safe in the office. Combination 26-14-42, shotgun and extra ammunition." The sheriff nodded, understanding the implication. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. What about Eleanor and Max? Robert's jaw tightened. "I'm getting them out." "How?" "They've got us surrounded." "Not completely." Robert moved to the closet beneath the stairs, pulling aside winter coats to reveal a small hatch in the wall. "Old farm tunnels. Prohibition era. Leads to the barn." Will's eyebrows rose. "You never mentioned that before." "Never needed it before." Robert checked his watch again. Almost 7. Full darkness would arrive soon, bringing tactical advantages and disadvantages for both sides. "I'll get Eleanor and Max through the tunnel. You hold position here. Make them think we're all still inside." "That's suicide. Robert, I can't hold them off alone." "You don't have to. Just buy us time until backup arrives." Robert gripped his friend's shoulder. "I'm not asking you to die for us. If it gets too hot, use the tunnel yourself." Before Will could protest further, the sound of breaking glass came from the back of the house. The attackers were making their move, trying to breach multiple entry points simultaneously. "Go!" Will urged, already moving toward the office where the gun safe waited. "Get them out. I'll be right behind you." Robert took the stairs 2 at a time, staying close to the wall where the treads were less likely to creak. At the top landing, he called softly, "Eleanor, it's me." The master bedroom door cracked open, Eleanor's pale face appearing in the gap. Behind her, Max stood alert, a low growl emanating from his throat. The puppy had positioned himself between Eleanor and the potential threat, his instincts overriding his fear. "We need to move," Robert said, extending his hand. "There's a way out through the barn." Eleanor didn't waste time with questions. She grabbed the small emergency bag they kept packed in the closet, a habit from Robert's military days that she'd never questioned, and scooped up Max. The puppy went willingly into her arms, though his eyes remained fixed on Robert, alert and watchful. "Stay low," Robert instructed as they moved along the hallway toward the back stairs. These rarely used servant stairs from the house's original construction would take them directly to the kitchen, near the hidden tunnel entrance. They had almost reached the stairs when a thunderous crash echoed from below, the sound of the back door being breached. Max tensed in Eleanor's arms, a warning growl building in his chest. "Change of plan," Robert whispered, pulling them back. "We'll use the window in James's room. There's a roof section below it, then a short drop to the ground." Eleanor's face tightened at the mention of their son's room, a space they'd avoided for 2 decades, but she nodded resolutely. Some barriers were less important when survival was at stake. James's bedroom remained frozen in time, posters of 90s rock bands on the walls, a high school football trophy on the desk. College application materials still spread across the bed as if their son had just stepped out momentarily. The air felt different here, undisturbed by the passage of years. Eleanor hesitated at the threshold. Max clutched to her chest. "It's okay," Robert said gently, guiding her inside. He'd want us to use it. As Robert moved to the window, checking for signs of the attackers in the yard below, Eleanor's gaze fell on a photo beside James's bed, their son with a younger Lily Peterson. Both smiling, arms around each other against the backdrop of Claremont's summer fair. She touched it briefly, then turned away. Clear for now, Robert reported, easing the window open. I'll go first, then you hand Max to me, then follow. The sound of gunfire erupted downstairs, Will engaging the intruders. Robert moved with renewed urgency, slipping through the window onto the sloped roof of the back porch. The shingles were slick with early evening dew, requiring careful movement to maintain footing. Now, Max, he called softly, arms extended. Eleanor passed the puppy through the window. Max remained perfectly still during the transfer, as if understanding the need for silence and cooperation. Once secure in Robert's grip, the German shepherd turned his attention to the yard below, ears forward, alert for threats. Eleanor followed with surprising agility, closing the window behind her to delay any pursuers. Together, they edged along the roof to where it dipped lowest near an old oak tree, its branches offering potential handholds. About a 6-foot drop, Robert assessed. I'll go first with Max, then help you down. Eleanor nodded, fear evident in her eyes but determination stronger. This was a woman who had faced her worst nightmare, losing a child, and survived. A nighttime escape from armed assailants was terrifying but navigable by comparison. Robert tucked Max securely against his chest, the puppy's heartbeat rapid but steady against his own. Then, with a lifetime of practiced movements, he lowered himself from the roof edge, hanging briefly before dropping to the ground below. His knees protested the impact, but he maintained his balance, immediately scanning for threats while still cradling Max. Clear, he whispered up to Eleanor. Hang from the edge and I'll guide your feet. Eleanor did as instructed, her form silhouetted against the darkening sky as she eased herself over the roof's edge. Robert helped position her for the safest landing, then steadied her as she dropped beside him. The barn lay 50 yards away across open ground exposed, vulnerable terrain with minimal cover. The main house now echoed with the sounds of confrontation shouts, breaking glass, occasional gunfire. Will was buying them time at considerable personal risk. Stay close, Robert murmured. Move when I move. Stop when I stop. With Max still secured against his chest, Robert led them along the shadow of the house toward the garden shed that would provide their first waypoint. Eleanor followed exactly in his footsteps, her breathing controlled, despite the adrenaline surely coursing through her system. They had covered half the distance to the barn when Max suddenly stiffened, his body rigid with alertness. A low, warning growl vibrated against Robert's chest, seconds before a shadow detached itself from the darkness ahead. Going somewhere. Mitchell. Derek Stevens stepped into view, rifle raised and aimed directly at Robert's chest. His face, half illuminated by the rising moon, wore an expression of cold satisfaction. Didn't think I'd forget about the back exit. Did you? Time slowed to a crystalline clarity as Robert assessed their position. Derek stood 15 feet away, rifle steady, a smaller handgun visible in his waistband. Behind him, the barn, their escape route, loomed dark and unreachable. Behind Robert, Eleanor's breathing had gone shallow with fear, but she remained steady, one hand gripping the back of his jacket. Max had gone completely still in Robert's arms, not with fear, but with the focused tension of a predator assessing threat. "Should have stayed in the house," Derek said, his voice unnervingly casual. "Would have been quicker that way. Less mess." He gestured with the rifle. "Now we've got to do this the hard way." "You won't get away with this," Eleanor said, her teacher's voice remarkably composed despite the tremor Robert could feel through her grip on his jacket. "Sheriff Blackwood's deputies are on their way." Derek's smile widened. "Roads are blocked. Accident on Highway 15. Big rig jackknifed right across both lanes." "Terrible timing." He shook his head in mock sympathy. "Help's gonna be delayed. By then." He left the implication hanging. Robert shifted slightly, angling his body to better shield Eleanor while scanning for any tactical advantage. The shed was too far to reach, the house too exposed. The only cover was a tractor parked 30 feet to their right, an impossible distance to cross before Derek could fire. "Why?" Robert asked, deliberately drawing Derek's attention. James was just a college kid. What could he possibly have found that was worth killing him? Derek's expression flickered surprise that Robert had pieced things together. Perhaps, or satisfaction at finally having someone recognize his handiwork. "Smart kid. Your son. Too smart. Found our distribution routes while working for the county surveyor. Started asking questions about property records. Easements on Stephen's land that didn't make sense. So you ran him off the road." Robert's voice remained level, but something cold and terrible was building behind his calm exterior. "Made it look like an accident," Derek confirmed with disturbing pride. "Dark night. Mountain road. Car goes over the edge into the river. Nobody asked too many questions about another teenager driving too fast." His eyes narrowed. Except he wasn't supposed to be alone that night. Lily was supposed to be with him. Eleanor made a small sound behind Robert, not quite a gasp. More like the involuntary release of a breath, long held. The revelation struck with physical force. Derek hadn't just killed James. He'd intended to kill Lily, too. "She was supposed to meet him," Derek continued, his voice taking on a nostalgic quality that chilled Robert more than any threat could have. "But they'd argued earlier. She was late. I couldn't wait any longer." He shrugged. "Had to improvise." "And 20 years later, you're still cleaning up loose ends," Robert said, mind racing through scenarios, seeking any opening that might give Eleanor and Max a chance. "Lily. Us. The dog." Derek's expression hardened. "Lily should have stayed gone, but she came back, started poking around old memories. Then your wife started asking questions at the library about old newspaper articles." He shifted his grip on the rifle. "Too many coincidences. Had to send a message." "By torturing a puppy." Eleanor's voice carried a mother's righteous fury. "What kind of monster?" "Shut up!" Derek snapped, rifle jerking toward her before returning to Robert. "The dog was just business. Like this is just business." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Nothing personal. Mitchell. Just tying up loose ends." In the fractional moment before Derek could squeeze the trigger, 3 things happened simultaneously. From the house came a tremendous crash followed by a shotgun blast, Will still fighting. Eleanor dropped to the ground, pulling at Robert's jacket, and Max silent, Traumatized Max, who had not made a sound for days, launched himself from Robert's arms with a ferocious snarl that seemed impossible from his small body. The German Shepherd puppy hit Derek's arm with all the force his 15 pounds could muster, jaws clamping onto the wrist of his gun hand. The shock and pain threw off Derek's aim, his shot going wide as he cursed and tried to shake off the furious ball of fur and teeth. Robert didn't waste the opportunity. He shoved Eleanor toward the tractor, following close behind as Derek's second shot kicked up dirt near their feet. Max maintained his grip on Derek's arm, growling and tearing at the sleeve with a fury born of accumulated trauma. "Get off me, you little—" Derek swung the butt of his rifle, connecting with Max's side. The puppy yelped in pain but refused to release his grip. Instinctively understanding his role in this desperate moment, Robert reached the tractor, positioning Eleanor behind its solid frame before turning back toward Derek and Max. The sight of the man striking the puppy ignited something primal in Robert, a protective rage that transcended calculation and strategy. He moved back into the open, Colt raised, voice cold with certainty. "Drop the rifle. Now." Derek looked up. Blood streaming from his wrist where Max's teeth had penetrated skin. For a moment, the tableau held man and dog locked in struggle. Robert advancing with unwavering aim. Eleanor sheltered but watching with wide eyes. Then Derek made his choice, swinging the rifle toward Robert even as he tried to dislodge Max. Robert fired twice. The first shot struck Derek's shoulder, spinning him halfway around. The second hit center mass. Derek staggered backward, rifle falling from nerveless fingers. Disbelief etched across his features. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then collapsed to his knees before pitching forward onto the ground. Max released his grip and limped quickly to Robert's side, whimpering softly from the blow he'd taken. Robert scooped him up, checking for injuries with gentle hands while keeping his attention on Derek's motionless form. "Robert," Eleanor called, emerging from behind the tractor. "The house." Flames were visible now through the downstairs windows. The confrontation inside had apparently ignited a fire. Smoke billowed from the broken windows as the blaze spread quickly through the old wooden structure. "Will," Robert said, already moving toward the house. "He's still inside." Eleanor caught his arm. "You can't go back in there. It's too dangerous." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night, distant but growing closer. The roadblock Derek had mentioned was apparently less effective than he'd claimed. "Get to the road," Robert instructed, handing Max to Eleanor. "Flag down the deputies when they arrive. Tell them Will's inside." "Robert, please." "I'll be right behind you," he promised, touching her face briefly. "Go now." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded, clutching Max to her chest as she headed toward the driveway. Robert turned back to the burning house, assessing entry points and smoke patterns with the mechanical precision of training that never fully left him. The front door was engulfed, the kitchen likely the same. The back entrance might still be passable. But for how long? He moved quickly, pulling his shirt up over his nose and mouth as he approached. The heat intensified with each step, the roar of the fire drowning out all other sounds. At the back door, Robert paused, calling out, "Will, can you hear me?" No response came from within, only the crackling of flames and the ominous groan of structural beams under stress. Robert was about to enter when movement caught his eye, a figure staggering from around the side of the house, coughing violently. "Will?" Robert rushed to the sheriff's side, supporting him as the bigger man leaned heavily against him. Will's face was streaked with soot, his left arm hanging awkwardly at his side, blood darkening his uniform sleeve. "Bastard shot me," Will managed between coughs. "Then set the damn place on fire." "Derek's dead," Robert reported, guiding his friend toward safer ground. "Eleanor and Max are heading for the road. Help's coming." Will nodded weakly, his considerable weight becoming heavier as adrenaline faded and injury took its toll. "There were 3 of them," he gasped. "Derek, his Uncle Frank, and someone else. Younger guy. Don't know if they all made it out." Robert looked back at the house, their home for 40 years. Now consumed by flames that reached toward the night sky with hungry fingers. Everything inside would be lost. Photos, memories. James's room preserved exactly as he'd left it. All of it turning to ash. Yet the overwhelming emotion Robert felt wasn't grief for these material losses. It was a strange, unexpected lightness, as if the fire was not just destroying their home, but purifying something long festering, burning away 2 decades of suspended grief, of questions unanswered and justice denied. They had reached the large oak tree at the edge of the yard when Eleanor returned. Max still clutched in her arms, deputies following close behind. The puppy spotted Robert and began squirming urgently until Eleanor set him down. Despite his injury, Max ran to Robert, pressing against his legs with nervous energy. "He wouldn't stay with me," Eleanor explained as deputies took charge of Will, administering first aid while calling for medical support. "Kept trying to get back to you." Robert knelt, examining Max carefully. The puppy had a noticeable bruise along his rib cage where Derek had struck him, but nothing appeared broken. His amber eyes met Robert's with an expression of such complete trust that something long frozen in Robert's chest seemed to crack and thaw. "You saved us," he told the puppy quietly. "All of us." As firefighters arrived and began battling the blaze, Robert, Eleanor, and Max were ushered to a safe distance. They sat together on the tailgate of a deputy's truck. A blanket wrapped around Eleanor's shoulders, Max curled between them. The puppy had finally succumbed to exhaustion, his small body rising and falling with deep, trusting sleep. "He'll need to see Dr. Cooper tomorrow," Eleanor said, gently stroking Max's head. "Make sure nothing's broken." Robert nodded, his attention divided between the sleeping puppy and the burning house. The flames had reached the 2nd floor now, illuminating James's window with an eerie orange glow. Soon that room, the shrine they'd maintained for 20 years, would be gone. "It's time, isn't it?" Eleanor said softly, following his gaze. "To let him go." Robert covered her hand with his. "Not let him go. Just carry him differently." A deputy approached, notepad in hand. "Mr. Mitchell, we need your statement about what happened here." Robert looked up, studying the young officer's face. "Did your men find anyone else besides Derek Stevens?" The deputy shook his head. "Not yet, sir. Fire department's still working on containing the blaze. Sheriff Blackwood mentioned there might be others." "2 more," Robert confirmed. "Derek's Uncle Frank and someone younger. Accomplices. We'll find them," the deputy assured him. "Sheriff's already put out an APB on Frank Stevens. Roadblocks are being set up." He hesitated. "Sir, about the shooting." It was clearly self-defense, but I still need to— I understand, Robert interrupted. I'll tell you everything. But first, I need to know my family has somewhere safe to stay tonight. You can come with me to the hospital, Will called from where paramedics were preparing to load him into an ambulance. Sarah's there. She'll help. As they gathered their few remaining possessions, Eleanor's emergency bag, Robert's wallet and keys, Max's leash, a deputy called out from near Derek's body. "Sheriff, you need to see this." The young deputy, who'd been speaking with Robert, hurried over, kneeling beside his colleague. After a brief examination, he returned, expression grave. "Sir, we found something on Mr. Stevens, a phone, an old one." He held up an evidence bag containing a battered flip phone, its case cracked and weathered. "Serial number matches the one registered to your son, the one never recovered from the accident scene." Eleanor gasped, her hand finding Robert's arm. "James's phone?" The deputy nodded. "Looks like Stevens kept it all these years, as some kind of trophy." "Or insurance," Robert said grimly. "Evidence he couldn't destroy but couldn't risk being found. We'll need to process it properly," the deputy explained. "But preliminary check shows it still has data, messages, photos." He met Robert's eyes. "It might contain proof of what your son discovered, what got him killed." As the deputy walked away, Eleanor leaned against Robert, her body trembling not with fear now but with a complex mixture of grief and vindication. Max stirred between them, whimpering softly in his sleep, chasing something in dreams that made his paws twitch and his ears flatten. "He found us," Eleanor whispered, watching the puppy. "Out of all the places Derek could have left him to die, he chose our land, almost like James was guiding him home." Robert wasn't a spiritual man. 2 tours in combat zones and the senseless loss of his only son had left little room for faith in divine intervention. Yet as he watched their home burn while cradling the improbable survivor who had led them to long-denied truth, he found himself considering possibilities beyond coincidence. "Maybe," he acknowledged softly, "or maybe some debts just demand to be paid, one way or another." The morning after the fire dawned clear and cold. The November sky a pale, washed-out blue that seemed too peaceful for all that had transpired. Robert stood at the window of their temporary accommodation, a small guest cottage behind Dr. Sarah Cooper's house that she used for visiting family. Eleanor was still asleep in the bedroom, exhaustion having finally claimed her around dawn. Max lay curled at Robert's feet, refusing to be more than a few steps from him since they'd arrived. The puppy's injuries had been thoroughly examined the night before. 2 bruised ribs, minor lacerations on his gums from biting Derek, but nothing broken or permanently damaged. Sarah had administered pain medication and gentle care, her clinical efficiency softening when she'd knelt to look Max in the eyes. "You're quite the hero, aren't you?" she'd said, and though Max made no sound in response, his tail had offered a tentative wag, the first voluntary expression of happiness they'd witnessed from him. A soft knock at the door roused Robert from his contemplation. Sheriff Blackwood entered without waiting for a response. His left arm now properly bandaged and supported by a sling. His face looked haggard, the lines around his eyes deeper than they'd been just days ago. "Thought you'd want an update," Will said, lowering himself carefully into a chair at the small kitchen table. Max approached him cautiously, sniffing at his boots before returning to Robert's side.
"Frank Stevens?" Robert asked. Joining his friend at the table, Will nodded grimly. "Found him at the Canadian border crossing near Eureka. Border Patrol picked him up trying to cross with false ID. He's in custody, talking like his life depends on it." A humorless smile. "Which it might, considering he's implicated in at least 3 deaths now, including your son's. And the third man, the younger one, Tyler Stevens, Derek's cousin, 25 years old." Will's expression darkened. "We found him in the woods behind your property. Dead. Looks like he was hit by a stray bullet during the firefight, tried to escape, but didn't make it far." Robert absorbed this with a slight nod. Another death. More ripples spreading from the stone Derek had cast 20 years ago. "James's phone?" he asked. "Being processed by State Digital Forensics. Preliminary results confirm what we suspected: text messages between James and a friend at the county office discussing irregular land surveys. Photos of what appear to be storage facilities on Stevens' property that never appeared in official records." Will paused. "And a voice recording dated the day before the accident." Robert's head came up sharply. "A recording?" Will nodded, his expression carefully controlled. "James recorded a conversation between Derek and Frank Stevens. They were discussing shipment routes, distribution points, names of buyers. James must have been hiding somewhere nearby. The quality's not great, but it's damning. And at one point," he hesitated. "Tell me," Robert said quietly. "Derek mentions Lily, says she's getting suspicious, asking too many questions. Frank tells him to handle it before she becomes a problem." Will met Robert's eyes. James was gathering evidence. Robert, he was trying to build a case against them. The revelation settled over Robert like a physical weight. His son hadn't been a random victim or in the wrong place at the wrong time. He'd been deliberately targeted because he was trying to do the right thing. Pride and grief tangled in Robert's chest, making it momentarily difficult to breathe. "Does Lily know?" he asked finally. "Not yet. I've got a deputy bringing her back from Missoula today." Will's expression softened. "She deserves to know the truth. That James was trying to protect her." The sound of movement from the bedroom alerted them to Eleanor's approach. She appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, wearing borrowed clothes that hung slightly loose on her slender frame. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was a quiet dignity in her posture, the resilience that had carried her through 20 years of grief now visibly strengthened by vindication. "I thought I heard voices," she said, crossing to press a kiss to Robert's temple before acknowledging Will with a nod. "Any news?" As Will repeated his update for Eleanor's benefit, Robert watched his wife's face, the play of emotions across features he had loved for more than 4 decades. Grief, anger, satisfaction, and finally, a profound relief that seemed to physically lighten her. When Will finished speaking, she sat beside Robert, her hand finding his on the table. "He was so much like you," she said softly. "Always trying to make things right." Will cleared his throat, clearly moved by the exchange. "There's something else you should know. The county assessor called this morning. With your house gone. They've accelerated the insurance process. The property itself is still yours, of course. Over 40 acres. They're calling it a total loss, which means the full policy value will be paid out."
We haven't thought that far ahead, Eleanor admitted. Where we'll live now. You've got time, Will assured her. Stay here as long as you need. Community's already organizing support. Pastor Miller's collecting donations. The ladies' auxiliary is planning meals. He smiled slightly. Small towns rally when one of their own is hurt. Robert found himself unexpectedly touched by this reminder of belonging. For 20 years, he and Eleanor had lived in Claremont, but apart from it, their grief creating an invisible barrier between them and their neighbors. Now, in the aftermath of violence and fire, that barrier was dissolving. There's one more thing, Will said, reaching carefully into his jacket with his good arm. He withdrew a small plastic evidence bag containing a charred metal object. Fire department recovered this from the remains of the house. Thought you might want it. Robert accepted the bag, turning it to reveal its contents, James's high school class ring, blackened by smoke but still intact, the school crest and his graduation year still visible beneath the soot. Eleanor made a small sound beside him, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. It was in his room, she whispered, on his dresser. He wasn't wearing it the day of the accident because the stone was loose. He was waiting to get it fixed. Robert handed the ring to Eleanor, watching as she cradled it in her palm like something infinitely precious. Only thing that survived the fire, he observed quietly. Will stood, adjusting his sling with a wince. I should get back. Press conference at noon. State police are taking over parts of the investigation. Drug trafficking across state lines makes it federal. But I wanted you to hear the updates from me first. He paused at the door. Oh, and Sarah asked me to tell you she's stopping by around 2. Something about Max's medication. After Will departed, Robert and Eleanor sat in contemplative silence, the weight of revelations settling around them. Max had moved to lean against Eleanor's leg, his warm presence a wordless comfort. Outside, the sun had risen higher, casting long rectangles of light across the cottage floor. We should get some breakfast, Eleanor said eventually, her practical nature reasserting itself. There's eggs and bread in the refrigerator. Sarah made sure we had supplies. Robert nodded, but made no move to rise. His thoughts had turned to the future uncertain territory after 20 years of living in suspended animation. We'll need to decide what to do next, he said, about the property, where to live. Eleanor considered this, her hand absently stroking Max's head. I've been thinking about that. The old Lawson place on Willow Creek Road has been for sale for months. It's smaller than our house was, but the land is good. 5 acres, room for Max to run. She glanced at Robert. It's not too far from town, but still private. The casual way she included Max in their future plans didn't escape Robert's notice. The German shepherd puppy, who just days ago had been a dying stranger tied to a tree, was now an assumed part of their family. The transition had happened so naturally that it seemed as if Max had always been meant to be theirs. We could look at it, Robert agreed. When things settle down. A knock at the door preceded Sarah Cooper's arrival several hours earlier than expected. The veterinarian entered with her characteristic energy, medical bag in one hand and a folder of papers in the other. Sorry to drop by unannounced, she said, though her expression suggested this wasn't entirely true. I was checking on Will at the station when Lily Peterson arrived. She asked me to give you something. Sarah handed the folder to Robert. Inside was a single photograph, James and Lily at 18,
arms around each other, laughing in the sunlight of a summer long past. On the back, written in faded blue ink, James and Lily, July 4th, making plans. She wanted you to have it, Sarah explained. Said it was the last photo taken of them together, a week before the accident. She kept it all these years. Eleanor touched the photograph gently, as if it might dissolve beneath her fingers. She loved him, she said simply. Yes. Sarah agreed. She still does. I think. She knelt to examine Max, who submitted to her gentle prodding with patient dignity. This little guy is healing remarkably well. The physical injuries, at least. The emotional ones will take longer. We know something about that, Robert said quietly. Sarah looked up, her professional detachment softening. I imagine you do. She completed her examination and stood. Keep him on the pain medication for 3 more days. Gentle exercise only for a week. And, she hesitated, then continued with the directness that characterized her approach to both medicine and life. He needs you as much as you need him. That's rare. Finding that kind of mutual healing. After Sarah left, Robert and Eleanor moved to the small porch attached to the cottage. They sat side by side on a weathered bench. Max settled between them, the photograph of James and Lily resting on Eleanor's lap. The late morning sun warmed their faces as they gazed out at Sarah's well-tended garden, now fading into winter dormancy. We never got to say goodbye, Eleanor said softly. To James, to the house, to our old life. Robert took her hand, his weathered fingers entwining with hers. Maybe we don't need to, he suggested. Maybe we just need to say hello to what comes next. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, a gesture so familiar yet newly significant. I think I'd like that. Between them, Max shifted, stretching slightly before settling more comfortably against their legs, and then, in the peaceful quiet of that moment, the German Shepherd puppy did something he hadn't done since coming into their lives. He sighed deeply, closed his amber eyes, and relaxed completely, his entire body communicating absolute trust and contentment. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn morning much like the one when Max had entered their lives, Robert stood on the front porch of their new home on Willow Creek Road. The modest farmhouse had been renovated over the past months. New windows, fresh paint, updated kitchen, but retained its character and charm. 5 acres of mixed pasture and woodland surrounded it, fenced securely to contain an energetic German shepherd who had grown from a traumatized puppy into a confident young dog. Max sat beside Robert now, no longer the frightened creature they'd rescued, but a strong, healthy companion whose protective instincts had been channeled into constructive purpose. Twice weekly, Robert took him to the Claremont Community Center, where Max worked with children recovering from trauma, his gentle patience and resilient spirit making him an ideal therapy dog. Eleanor emerged from the house carrying 2 mugs of coffee, her hair caught by the breeze as she joined them on the porch. At 66, she had returned to teaching part-time, working with at-risk youth who responded to her combination of empathy and quiet strength. Sheriff's coming up the drive, she noted, handing Robert his mug.
Will Blackwood's patrol SUV approached at a leisurely pace. The past year had been busy for Claremont's sheriff. The Stevens case had expanded into one of the largest drug trafficking investigations in Montana's recent history, with connections reaching as far as Seattle and Vancouver. Frank Stevens had received multiple life sentences for his role in 3 murders, including James Mitchell's. The family's criminal enterprise had been dismantled, their properties seized, their influence in the community permanently broken. "Morning," Will called as he climbed from his vehicle. Max trotted down to greet him, accepting a brief pat before returning to Robert's side. "Thought you might want to know Lily Peterson's back in town. For good this time. Looks like bought the old Miller place on Sycamore Street." Robert nodded, processing this information. In the year since the confrontation at their former home, Lily had visited Claremont twice, once for the memorial service they'd finally held for James, and again to testify at Frank Stevens's trial. Each time, she'd visited briefly with Robert and Eleanor, their shared connection to James creating a tentative bridge across years of separation. "She's opening an art therapy studio," Will continued, accepting the coffee Eleanor offered. "For kids who've been through trauma. Asked if Max might visit sometimes." He glanced at Robert. "Told her I'd pass along the invitation?" "We'll consider it," Eleanor said, when Robert remained silent. "Max has been good with the children at the community center." Will nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket. "Almost forgot. This came to the station for you." He handed Robert a small package wrapped in brown paper. "State police finished processing all the evidence. This was with James's things." After Will departed, Robert and Eleanor returned to the porch swing, Max settling at their feet as Robert carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small leather notebook, James's journal, its pages water-damaged but largely intact. A note from the evidence technician explained it had been found in the pocket of James's jacket, recovered from the riverbank days after the accident. Together, they read their son's final entries, his suspicions about the Stevens family, his plans to gather evidence, his determination to protect Lily and his community. The last entry, dated the day before his death, contained a single line, "Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the risk." Eleanor's tears fell silently as she traced the words with her fingertip, connecting across time with the son they'd lost. Robert's arm tightened around her shoulders, his own grief present, but transformed by the knowledge that James had died, not randomly, but purposefully, trying to make a difference. Max rose and placed his head on Eleanor's knee, his amber eyes watching her with the intuitive empathy that had made him such an effective therapy dog. She smiled through her tears, stroking his silky ears. "He would have liked you," she told the German shepherd. "You're both protectors." Later that afternoon, Robert walked alone to the small memorial they'd created at the edge of their property, a simple stone bench beneath a young oak tree. A bronze plaque bore James's name, his dates, and the words from his journal, "Some things are worth fighting for." Robert sat on the bench, Max settling beside him with the quiet companionship that had become their custom. In the distance, Eleanor could be seen in the garden, preparing beds for winter, her movements purposeful and serene. "We're doing better," Robert said quietly, as if speaking to his absent son. "All of us." Max's ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice.
head tilting in attentive curiosity. Robert smiled, resting a hand on the dog's solid shoulder. "You led us home," he told Max. "In more ways than one." As if in response, Max did something rare and precious. He leaned against Robert's leg and offered a single, soft bark. Not of warning or fear, but of agreement, of belonging. On the bench beside them, James's journal lay open to its final page, where beneath his last entry, Robert had added words of his own. "Here, no life is forgotten, not even the smallest. When life has weathered your spirit and the years have collected more losses than victories, remember Robert and Eleanor's journey. Like them, you may carry grief that settled into your bones, the child who never came home, the dreams surrendered to necessity, the person you once were, fading in memory's rear view. But healing doesn't demand forgetting. It simply asks that you make room for what comes next, unexpected and unplanned. Sometimes redemption arrives in the most vulnerable package: a trembling puppy, a neighbor's kindness, a truth finally spoken after decades of silence. Your story isn't finished when tragedy strikes. It's merely waiting for the next chapter to begin. The courage isn't in avoiding pain, but in remaining open, despite it, in extending your scarred hands to another living soul who needs exactly what your experience has taught you. Remember that the most profound connections often come after our greatest losses, not as replacement, but as continuation. Like Max finding his voice after trauma.